Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sword and Tea, a chat show by Sword and Key, where we talk to game creators, designers, actors, voice actors, and everything else under the sun. Everybody who is in and around, or even tangentially connected to the TTRPG community. I'm Derek Sword. I'm your host today. You see him pronouns. I am joined today by Nick, game creator of many things, but namely among them which we will be discussing today, Eldritch Automata. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Before we jump into everything, if you want to elevator pitch yourself, who you are in the community, stuff that you are connected to, maybe a little bit about Eldritch Automata before we jump into that, but just kind of who you are.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Francia, also known as Nobleman Nick. I'm the creative director of Gehenna Gaming. At Gehenna Gaming, we are a horror-focused gaming group that does events as well as actual plays and streams. And now dipping our toes into full-on TTRPG design. I myself, other than being with Gehenna Gaming, a TTRPG streamer, designer, writer, but actually my first and foremost profession is AV. I work as a visual effects artist as well as an AV engineer. Um, and film and nerd stuff and TTRPGs kind of go hand in hand, and that's kind of what contributed to all of this. Eldritch Automata is a year zero based engine TTRPG game made up of all my favorite things that I grew up with child. It's about mechs, it's about horror, it's about uh, eldritch abominations and, biblically accurate, like geometrically perfect angels that are trying to kill you. The kind of short elevator pitch that I've always said is, you are fighting gigantic eldritch abominations who are that want to eat you, who are being commanded by angelic beings that want to control you while piloting giant war machines that are, slowly killing you.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, what can go
Uh,
wrong?
what could go Absolutely, and that was honestly that concept was what drew us at Sword and Key to want to feature this game. If you are just joining Sword and Key for the first time, if you are just new to Eldritch Automata, we are featuring this game. We have had a so far a one shot of it last week in this same time slot, and we will have the part two of that, which will involve the mechs much more heavily, coming up next Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So let's jump into Eldritch Automata. It is a heavy game. It is a very cool game, and there is something so intrinsically attractive about a game where you know that your character is imperiled. That if they do survive, that might not be best case scenario. That sometimes death is the best case scenario, and we do really love those games, especially here, as we have played Trophy Dark and Sunken, and we were just talking about Vast Grim before we had started streaming. So, what is it that really drew you, especially? What's your history with horror? I guess is what I'm asking. Is this something that you
Ooh.
encountered later in life, or I've loved monsters since I was a little kid. Are you the same way? What's your attachment to horror?
So my horror journey has a lot of stages and it's on and off because I didn't I don't think I really started exploding into like a horror lord or horror geek until like high school. But my affiliation with horror growing up, it's always been there. So at 2 years old, I saw my first horror film accidentally. And like my parents didn't want me, but I saw Child's Play 2. And that haunted my nightmare. So Chucky was like my personal boogeyman growing up. Um, and I saw like shit, and I saw like movies such as like Alien when I was like 7, things like that, and kind of grew up tangentially around horror. So like come high school, got really into reading about Lovecraft. I like some of the more darker fantasies. I thought the more grim and gritty was really awesome. Even like cartoons I watched when I was in like elementary school, like when other people's were like, they're watching SpongeBob and stuff, I was very much into Danny Phantom because there was about Ghost and such and such. I'm sure if Gravity Falls was around when I was a kid, I would have ate that up. But even like Are You Afraid of the Dark, Camp Scaredy Cat, just things like that. So I've always been and Goosebumps in like that kind of kid horror. And then when I got to like high school and then college, I really started like kind of educating myself on the movies and media that kind of have made up what horror is. Um, so anything from like watching, Scream to Halloween to finally seeing Alien again now that I was older, and like that's like my favorite movie of all time. And even my TTRPG experience, my first ever game I ever played was Mage the Awakening when it was New World of Darkness. So even before D&D, so I was always in kind of that range of dark fantasy to dark horror to everything else. Um, and then the rest is history, as they say. It's always been something with me. I like being scared. I like scaring others. I think that release you get, that relief at the end of everything, is one of the best experiences. It's euphoric. I love thrill rides, whether it be like extreme haunted houses to roller coasters. Um, I love it all.
Absolutely. Yes, I could have guessed for some of that, but no, you're absolutely right. That thrill of knowing that you're safe, but also choosing to feel like you're actually in danger is a really interesting thing that the human mind can wrap around. And definitely Eldritch Automata does touch on that because you have some very scary monsters in this. I'm just just gonna flat out say that. I know not all of them are necessarily like official. A lot of them are still getting worked on a lot. But this feels like a good kind of like segue to talk about even before how you fight these things, because the story of Eldritch Automata
hmm
seems to be the end of the world happens, and all of these things are climbing out of the shadows, or coming down from the sky, and we are just humanity is beset upon. I think it said something like 90% of all humanity is just wiped out in moments, and then what's left has to deal with what's even worse. And so I was hoping to talk about some of the monsters that well, I actually really appreciate through the enemy codex you sent me for the one shot or the two shot
Yeah, it's
rather.
still unfinished, but there's a lot of cool ideas in there.
There's a lot of really cool ideas. One of them that I saw that did make it from the Dark Passenger, which is the module that you had written, which if folks are familiar with Eldritch Automata might have seen at this point, and did also make it into the enemy codex, is the Flesh Ripper,
Yeah.
which is somehow got more horrifying from Dark Passenger, the description, to the enemy codex. This is a grotesque monstrosity composed of writhing arms and jagged fangs, which rends its enemies with dissonant limbs. Beware being caught by this horror, as it prefers to kill its prey by ripping them limb from limb. After eating, the horror adds the limbs of the victims to its body, adding another appendage to its arsenal. It feels weird reading all that with lo-fi going on behind, but that is fucking metal as hell. That is so cool. It's just that I saw that immediately in my mind, and the fact that you called a chariot is just even more horrifying, because chariots have such a horrifying kind of concept to themselves. If you're familiar with like ancient warfare or
Yeah.
gladiatorial combat, like a chariot is a terrifying thing, and then you're just having this thing just ripping people apart and then incorporating their limbs into itself. I'm seeing a lot of body horror when it comes to I guess the horrors. I guess maybe that's where we should start. There are two subsections of enemies that you have, right?
hmm
Horrors and seraphs. I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about inspirations for either of them.
So Horus and Seraphs came about kind of wanting to combine two of my favorite like concept of creatures. I really like cosmic horror. And I mean anyone that reads this book can see it. I like cosmic horror. What I don't like is that when everyone thinks of cosmic horror, they think of Lovecraft. They don't think of anything beyond that, because there is so much original cosmic horror that isn't like the Lovecraft mythos. And it's okay to be inspired, because like those are the building blocks. So the horrors are, these body horror amalgamations of humans. They are just humans piled onto each other in like grotesque, in ways. They're not aliens. They're not like otherworldly creatures. They are literally like the victims that have been contorted, and kind of just enraged into these mighty beasts. And if you see from the cover art that we've always shown, that is a horror on the cover, and you can see it's made up of multiple people on there. And the thing about the horror, is that every horror starts small, but as they kill and eat more and more and add more to it, they start to morph to these types. And horrors will even sometimes join together to make a bigger horror because the bigger the horror is, the stronger it is. Um, and so there are like levels of it. So there's a chapter it's written, it's being edited now, but it's not completely done. By one of our talented writers, Connery Purcell. And horrors start out at that like personal level, and there is like rules for, and as we saw in our past our first session of our two-parter, you can fight them while being like a human, but eventually they get bigger and bigger and bigger until the only way to take them out was with an automata. And then the seraphs are the big bads. They are the boss monsters. They are your adventure ending, your campaign ending creatures. um, the really nice thing about seraphs, I would say, is there's a finite amount of them. What that finite amount is, we don't know. We don't reveal in the book. There's a lot of speculation, but when you kill a seraph, it should feel very important because you've permanently removed this being, this higher being, off the playing field. And so the seraph, as kind of like juxtaposed against the horrors, they are these beautiful geometric style creatures that like are very much angelic. They are the angels, um, to take from like inspiration from like Evangelion and like similar sources. So the seraphs are very much like the commanding officers, but I feel like they're more horrifying because of a horror, you just, you die and that's it. Or a seraph, you could become controlled by them. You could become, like the unwilling slave to them. There's a lot of almost like sentience with the seraph, even though it doesn't speak or it doesn't like communicate in a language well, with the exception of some. I mean, I'm assuming you read through Dark Passenger, so
I
there
did,
there
yeah.
there are some exceptions there, but
Right.
and someone just says based on the lore of the Bible there should be at least seven archangels. It's like, so yeah, there's obviously a lot of like religious connection to that, like
Hmm.
inspired, but I actually don't like to call them divine because in my mind they're like otherworldly, like alien beings. They're not divine. It's just they mimic that iconography because on a primal way, I think when people see creatures like this, and in the lore it talks about it that there are some people that are like, okay, these are aliens, we have to fight them, and there are some people will be like, well, this is the rapture, and we or we're gonna start a religion around this because I feel
Absolutely.
like yeah, I feel like if this did happen, there would be a variety of reactions to both the horrors and the seraphs, and I think that's something that we go into the book a lot is about how each different region has adapted and kind of um, taken the day, like the Advent day and everything that's happened, and kind of ingrained it into its culture.
That is a really cool concept because, yeah, absolutely. If we had aliens visit us today, it would destabilize a lot of world
Oh
religions,
yeah.
regardless of how they look. And a lot of media does touch on that. But yet to have literal, biblically accurate angels as kind of become a shorthand in mimetic culture lately, to have those arrive on Earth and just start destroying things, there would be people who would just accept that or even be happy about it. There's plenty of people around even today who are just like looking at their watches waiting for the end times to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah, let's go ahead and get into the heavy shit with religion while we're taking this road. So what is yeah, obviously, like you said, they're not necessarily divine, but these were inspired somewhat. Um, do you have a background with religion personally? Is it just like religious horror is a very cool subsection of horror? Is that something that inspired you? What was the kind of impetus to make like this almost biblically divisive horrors and seraphs as the main focus for your end world?
So for anyone that might not notice or might not have read my profile, so I'm Cuban and Chinese, Hispanic, and our background were very my family grew up very religious. I went to church every Sunday. I went to a Catholic school all the way up until I got to college. Um, so like, Christianity was very well ingrained into my upbringing, and that's kind of formed my relationship, with it later on. So I did grow up like hearing stories about angels and demons and whatnot, and that's the kind of like beautiful like paintings and like architecture that you would see, and even like when I looked in and saw what more biblically accurate angels would look like, these like immense beings that we really couldn't comprehend. I always felt like religion always had, and this is any religion, has a kind of connection to the cosmology and like even cosmic horror in general. And I think religion is often seen as this, social high standard that when it's in your face. I know religious horror really affected me, young growing up. Like, I watched stuff like The Exorcist and I like thoroughly believed. I'm like, well, this can happen to me. This is something that can easily happen. Or like, demons, I always like things like that. Or when you're a kid and you're looking into the dark and you can see shapes and you're like, there are these demons and ghosts and spirits that are trying to take me away, but
Right.
if I clutch my Bible close enough and recite my prayers, I'll be okay. And um I'm pretty neutral on religion. Like I'm spiritual myself, and I'm still fairly religious, with a few conditional factors.
Of course.
Let's
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't put it, I don't deprive everyone of having religion or being against religion. I think everyone has their opinions on these things, and I think that there's whenever you try to change like super long-standing traditions, you're gonna see a lot of friction. And I think that's okay, and I think that's natural. We have to go through that. So kind of when I meant when I was talking about it in the prior question, I didn't want to make a game that was specifically like confirming one religion over the other, because all religions have similarities is to them. They all share certain stories, like certain narratives. And I wanted everyone to look into this book and be like, okay, like how do you take it? Like if you were in this world, how would you accept that? Would you think this is religious? What religion would you tie this most to? Would you maybe just start a new religion? Like cults are a thing, obviously. Um,
Sure. And that's
so
really
it,
the terrifying thing is you have like
yeah,
when you get a horror that becomes big enough, why isn't that a god? You have something that is
yeah.
towering taller than any building that is composed of, death and destruction. That in any religious sense is a deity. So why not? Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a really cool region that was uh written by one of our writers, Chris Hanley, who he's from the United Kingdom. He wrote about the region of the United Kingdom, which is called the Reformed Kingdom,
Mhm.
which is basically they outlaw the practice and thinking of their the shafts and horrors as divine. They deny their divinity outright and have kind of sheltered into older traditions and practices. Like they call their automatas knights. They're all named after knights and like famous war heroes and figures. um, and they've kind of had that complete rejection. Whereas, you have a region like Mexico or Neo Sonola that was written by D'Angelo Murillo, where it almost leads to this resurgence in Brahiri, that old kind of ingrained like Mexican style witchcraft,
Yeah,
which
with
is
Elizabeth.
something that's very real to people. And like you said, like I think that some people are gonna say, well, if you call something, call something a deity, you're giving it power, and if you give it power, you're never gonna be able to overcome it. And it's really interesting how we've had these different perspectives, and these are perspectives I never would have thought of myself, and that's kind of been one of the amazing things is bringing writers on.
Hmm.
It's because you take your idea and you give it to these writers, and these writers do something with it that you never would have imagined. And if that's a lesson to anything for everyone, it's that trust people with your work and your world, because they're going to find and make things that you never would have thought of on your own.
Absolutely. And that is such a cool concept that the monsters that you do have in this, the horrors especially, do reflect like a lot of the names that you use are Western biblical, Judeo-Christian biblical. There's
Mhm.
Behemoth, there's Leviathan, but like that's also something that my brain didn't even consider. Is oh yeah, of course, there's going to be horrors in the ocean. That's even worse. Now, like we can do get back to the nautical horror that so frequently features on this channel. Um, but they do have those kind of biblical titles of those ancient animals. I was also raised Catholic. I was also terrified of being possessed when I was a little kid. That was like the scariest thing to me. I used to watch those like the Beyond Belief or the one that had William Riker in it. I
Mhm.
think that was Beyond Belief actually. But there's stories like people being possessed, and I was like the scariest thing is losing my autonomy to something that was inherently evil
Yeah.
and yeah, so the religious trauma is there for both of us. Um, but that is something that's super fun about this is yeah, now we get to fight back. But it mentions early on in the work that I have, which like what we said is rough draft, but I still love everything that's in there. Um, that like our most intense nuclear weaponry was only the thing that could leave a scratch on these. So then you have these monsters where conventional weaponry isn't doing its trick. Again, that's a god. Why wouldn't cults exist? I'm
Yeah.
still of the belief that there should be more movies about a Godzilla cult. Godzilla should have so many cults. That is a deity. But any way you scratch it, that is an unkillable kind of monster. It comes and wrecks your city every now and then, but then sometimes save it. That's a god. It, literally Godzilla. Why not?
Yeah, Mothra
Um,
has a cult. Why not Godzilla?
exactly. Mother as a cult. Yeah, it's not fair to poor Gojira. But I do also love the naming conventions. You do provide a list of a number of mech names, which are super great. But I love also that there are going to be factions out there which have specific names, and that's only further inspiring me for next Saturday for what I'm going to name this mech that just came out of Washington D.C. And so I've got a few tossing around in my head right now. Um, but you've set the groundwork for such an interesting world that you have allowed all of these other creators to come in and kind of put their fingerprint on it a little bit and add to the overall mythos. But yeah, it's not monolithic. It in the way that humanity, the world overall, would not experience this as a monolithic event, all experiencing the same thing but interpreting it different
Mhm.
ways is such a really, really cool, beautiful concept of this otherwise horrifying, bloody, tragic hero game. Um, let's we talked a little bit about the actual horrors. I'm trying to think if there's any specific ones that I want to bring up. We'll kind of go through them real quick here because we mentioned at least the chariot flesh ripper, great. The magician howling regret, nightmarish amalgamation of flesh and sound, has a howl that disorients and weakens its prey. So I like that they're not always physical as well. That
Mhm.
there's like this really horrifying, and I can see it in my head of like a city just overrun with these things. You turn a corner trying to get away from something that's trying to tear you to pieces, only to get blasted by some sonic blast from another creature, or get rended into oblivion by some sort of psychic creature, or dissolved into the corrosive fluids of the corrosion revenant, or the spider-like weaver, or the phantom pain,
I love my
which
names. My names are
is so
so over the
good.
top. It's like Kojima level of like name ridiculousness, but I'm having my fun.
It does feel like there's well, because it feels like the people that survive would be the ones who would be chronically online because they're not going outside and getting killed by horrors. So they're the ones that are naming stuff like, oh no, this one's yeah, the Phantom Pain and a Fire Starter and a Frostbiter. Yeah, they're so good. Just so good.
You mentioned
Um,
really quick
yeah.
because you did mention really liking in the chat, you mentioned Annihilation being one of your favorite like horror novels. Um and one the Howling Regret is because so I've never read the novel, but I've watched the movie and I'm such a big fan of the movie. So the bear creature from Annihilation is essentially was the main inspiration for the Howling of Regret because the whole thing is about when it screams, they're carbon copies of the victims that it's taken, so it can mimic voices.
Hmm.
And that's one of the talents it has.
Yeah, the Lilla monster, which is snake-like, has sleek blackened scales that have the faces of its victims etched upon it like a pattern. That Like any of these are just the description alone is enough to give you nightmares, and then you're supposed to somehow fight against these. And I do like how like some of them seem to have adapted almost to fight mechs too. Like you do have Livewire, which has electrical energy, a draining life force
Yep.
from its victims. And yeah, then when you get higher and higher, you get finally to you get Behemoth, you get Leviathan, you get Goliath. You know, again these
Yeah, they haven't been
biblical
edited
names.
with the advanced descriptions just yet. Because those are the ones that like I wrote really quick. I was like, oh, I need to make a bunch of these. Now I'm gonna go back in and like actually expand on them.
Yeah, I mean 100% because that's yeah. Once you get a name, work backwards. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you do have yeah Seraphs. You do have Metatron. You know, you have the voice of God there. That's great. Urfiel, Ariel, Zadkiel. Yeah, I can't wait to see the final version on these. Do you have I should have asked. Do you have an artist attached to doing art for any of these?
So the Automata's art is all being done by Geo Misal Manning, goes by Geo. Geo's amazing and is the best mech artist I've ever, had the pleasure of talking to. And
Hmm.
he's really brought the Automatas to life. We are still, because we're slowly reaching out to artists now, because that's the one thing. All our writing is done for the most part. We're just formatting and editing. We're trying to get the quick start done now because we're preparing for the relaunch of the Kickstarter. We are in the midst of talking to artists and getting more art made, specifically nailing down a team of artists that can do horrors and the seraphs. We have a few that are in our sites. So nothing yet that we can talk about or show,
Fair
but
enough.
great stuff coming down the pipeline.
It does feel like the horrors do need a level of detail to them. So you like, especially stuff like the Little Monster, which has those faces and the black scales,
Yeah,
or any of them that are comprised of these accumulated kills that have all just like combined to make this horrifying creature of flesh and terror. That's yeah, that's
I almost
upsetting.
think that the art for the horrors should be like almost like sketch art, like very scratchy. Because
Oh
nine
yeah,
times out of ten, if you come in contact with a horror, you're probably, as a human, you're probably going to die.
yeah, just
And
sketchy, splashed with a little blood. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
what you're
stuff
doing while
that
you're running away from it.
exactly like if
That's very good.
you're not gonna take a long time to like stare at this thing. And
Yeah, it's a field journal that's had to be passed to like 10 different hands at this point because the person writing it keeps losing like, oh, I found this somewhere. I'm gonna go ahead and add my submissions to it. Yeah, and the fact that they probably keep mutating and changing, that no two
Mhm.
will look exactly alike. Yeah, that's because they're chaos. They're constantly changing and adapting and getting more disgusting. Yeah, that's oh, God, it's such a wealth of inspiration for GM's imagination to be like, oh, what is the best way I can consensually upset my players? What is the idea? What is the thing that my brain can do that makes even me go, oh, I don't like that, and then give that as a gift to my players. That's it's absolutely great. Um, let's see. We've talked about enemies. I think it is high time we talk about how we can fight back against them. So the world has been rent asunder by beings from above and below. Religious trauma is rife for the end of the world, and yet now we are fighting back. Um, Within lore, where does the automata come from?
So, really awesome question. I get to talk about one of my favorite parts. So, the kickoff of Advent Day, which is Advent Day is what we call the event where all this kind of starts. There's this
Hmm.
being called the Architect that's revealed. The Architect does a lot of shit, kills a lot of people and basically lets loose the horror. And then employees is kind of like the is I don't even want to call it the big bad, but like the top of the hierarchy. But the thing about the Architect is that it hasn't been seen after the initial day that appeared in the sky to everyone. So it's something that, is talked about and everyone kind of knows about it, but the architect is not something, it's not a statable creature. It's not something that's going to probably show up in your campaign. I always say, because someone always talks about it, it's like, oh, when will you like stat out the architect, like the architect? It's like one creature. I said, the day we stat out the architect, will be the last supplement that'll end the entire game line, and then we'll reboot to like a second edition. So many, many years in the future, hopefully, if we
Yeah,
get the
it's like, what do
chance
you
to
want? A
just
happy ending? What's wrong with you?
yeah,
You
well,
you can't fight the architect.
maybe you can. Who knows? We'll see what the future unholds.
We'll
As of
see.
right now, not really. But the thing that the architect does is that the architect changes the world, for better or for worse. So it does these horrible things because it does set the horrors loose. And and the Seraphs do serve in its name. And something interesting about the Seraphs, and I know this is like a roundabout point to what you're asking, but I will get to that question in a second. I just need the setup, the
Please,
background.
please take all the time you need. I
My
have my
my
tea. You're good.
my ADHD like commands that I give you all the important background information before I answer this very simple question.
Go for it, please. Same way.
so so the Seraphs follow the architect's orders, and this they all have a function that they've been given by the architect, and sometimes it's not like just annihilation, it's something else. Um, but the architect also led humanity to discover the automata, and what the automata are. It's something we talk about in the book, but in lore, like in the universe, not a lot of people know, or not a lot of people can confirm. But automata are essentially blueprints that were designed off of primordial gods. Like basically, it is the shell of these old gods that were once like the natural enemies to the Seraphs and the to whatever they are. And like I said, I say the word old gods, but I don't mean divine. I mean like alien, I guess is what I would say. More
Right.
alien. Um,
Hence the Eldritch of Eldritch
yeah.
Automata. Yeah.
So I always joke at if like the old, if the automatas are to the old gods, which the horrors are to the old ones or the great old ones. So it's like they're the natural enemies. They're similar in a lot of ways, but they're the only things that can kill a horror and kill huge horrors, and they're the only thing that can kill a seraph because seraphs really only come in that one size category. Um, and so the automatas are built from these blueprints, and where they found these blueprints, some say they found it in a cave somewhere. Some say that great scientists were hit by like inspiration and like visions, and they wrote it all down. A lot of kind of like scattered stories, but what's generally accepted is that the architect showed humanity how to build the automatas, and that's really interesting because it inflicts all these punishments and all these like creatures on them, but it also gives them the opportunity to fight back. So it's no one really knows why the architect did that. Why? I mean, I know, but no one no one in
Right.
game knows why the architect did that. Why it wanted to hurt humanity, a lot, but also give it its chance to fight back. So it's a very interesting, like, is there a grand all thought experiment going on here? Is this, some forlorn prophecy? I don't know. Or
Yeah.
maybe I do know. Who knows? But we'll get to that eventually, one day down the road. And then the automata are these, they are, because they're built from these blueprints, they are these giant war machines that have been outfitted with like, you know, sometimes guns, sometimes melee weaponry. This is kind of where all the great mecha stuff comes into play. Uh, Something that I really like about cosmic horror is like the creatures and like the fear, but something that I thought was missing, and I think is missing from a lot of like horror TTRPG in general, is there is not a lot of action horror. There's a lot of horror where you're meant to hide, you're meant to run away, you're meant to avoid the horror. Um, but and not saying that there isn't any of this, but it's the amount of systems and like games where it's about fighting back against those horrors,
Hmm.
against that element of horror, isn't something that's super present. And so I really wanted to make an action horror game, and that's kind of where with mechs you're always going to have like a power fantasy element to it because you are in a giant like war machine. You're like, whether it's Pacific Rim, Evangelion, Gundam, like you're gonna feel powerful in these things.
Yeah.
But there, and I always like to say it's a power fantasy until it's not, because there's always a
Hmm.
moment in Eldritch Automata where it feels like you're wrecking shit. Sorry, I can curse on this, right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, please. Yeah.
yeah. you're wrecking shit, and then eventually there just comes this point where it's like my resources have run out. Now I am in danger. This invincible armor is now a iron tomb that I'm going to die in.
Right. Yeah, there is always that scene, like you mentioned Pacific Rim, where the arm gets ripped off, or you're piloting it solo, or something terrible happens, and you do realize that you're gonna suffer a pretty terrible death
Hmm.
stuck inside this thing. Um, there's so many, like, again, my brain just absolutely gets just racked with inspiration when you talk about this kind of stuff, because it is so incredibly cool. I'm curious what your personal, you've referenced a number of, mech pop culture entities. Where did you start with mechs? What is like your favorite version of a mech? Like, when you think of it, what is your big inspiration for mechs in general, for giant robots?
So Evangelion definitely for sure. I also suit like, a little bit of Gundam, a lot of Pacific Rim because I fucking love that movie.
Absolutely.
Godzilla because I love kaiju. A little bit of stuff. Things like Silent Hill are honestly also in the kind of cited as recommendation. Not for the mechs, obviously, but just for the horror in general.
Sure.
And the game, I've always am very vocal about this. The game started out as a PBTA hack to run Evangelion in. And when I initially ran it, it was a lot of fun. And then I said, you know what? Like maybe I should expand this. And maybe, and obviously like I needed to write my own world. And that's kind of what how this journey started like 7 years ago. Um, and then I got to a point where the system I was like PBTA does a lot of cool things, but for the amount of combat and stuff I want, it was kind of a little limiting. So that's how I switched over to Year Zero. So Evangelion's always been the kind of huge primary touchstone. But I mean, my relationship with Mecha has been numerous. I've seen many of the Gundam series. I grew up watching like G Gundam. Giant robots have always been in my heart. I mean, I can see in my other room I have like multiple Gunpla models built just because like I have a lot of fun with those. But things like Pacific Rim, like I talked about, I grew up watching all the Godzilla movies. If you ever want to, talk to me about Godzilla, you're gonna have a hell of a conversation. My favorite Godzilla is Godzilla vs. Destroya. For anyone out there, watch that. It's great. It's a great one.
Fantastic movie. Yeah, I have a little Godzilla that sits in front of me for every
Awesome.
screen. Yeah, he's a little classic one. Yeah, Godzilla vs. Destroy. I love Destroyer's little knee mouths that he has. It's
Yeah.
so great. Great monster.
And just like all like the forms, sensations, and transformations. I love any creature that transforms. I'm like very anime like that. This game has a lot of anime influence to it. Although like I tried to keep it gritty. I mean there is just there's some influences and there's some things I'm never gonna escape. So I
Were you
love
a Power
multi
Rangers kid?
not entirely like I watched Power Rangers, but that wasn't
Yeah.
like my thing. So growing up, I want to say probably my favorite anime when I was like really young. I grew up with a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh. Um,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh, G Gundam, Outlaw Star was my favorite, and still is one of my favorite. I think Evangelion's my favorite overall because like I like that even against other media that aren't anime. Um, but yeah, I was a very much an anime kid growing up, whether it was like on Kids WB or like you know, 4K or whenever it would come up.
The good old days. Yeah.
Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is
Yeah.
ancient cosmic horror. That's what that is.
It really. Yeah.
Cassiopeia.
It really is. Yeah. I try explaining Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes to people who have no concept for. I'm like, okay, so we need to go back to ancient Egypt. Yes, the game or the show about the Japanese kid with the wild hair. We need to go back to ancient Egypt and his grandpa, but also another guy who like now possesses him because of a puzzle box. It's a little Hellraisery. Like, it's just the deep lore of Yu-Gi-Oh! I was absolutely a Power Rangers kid, so anytime you talk about like a monster going from small to super large, my brain instantly goes to Rita Repulsa, just like,
Oh
the little
yeah.
clay monsters, and then they get blown up, and then
Golda.
now it's time to get in the mechs, and yeah, that's where my brain 100% goes. I was the perfect age when the first Power Rangers movie came out with Ivan Ooze in it. So I apologize if I make any of those references next week when we do get to the mechs.
No, that's fine.
But another cool kind of inspiration that I noticed, because you talked about how like the mechs themselves within lore are these ancient things. Are you a big SCP person?
Yeah, funny enough. Oh, I didn't think I was going to talk about this. Funny enough, so I went to school for digital audio and video,
Yep.
and my capstone film to graduate was the school gave me like because we had to pitch our ideas, so like instead of every student doing like a film, like we would pick three projects that people would pitch. So I ended up pitching short film based on SCP 106, and I ended up getting a small budget of $3,000, which was, for a student that really was working on like minimum wage at like his school cafeteria was amazing. So we actually filmed a and released a short film based on SCP 106. It was filmed because I went to school in Tempe, Arizona. It was filmed at
Hmm.
in Phoenix at the Hayden Flour Mill, which was this abandoned flour mill, which had never had anything filmed there. We were the first film or ever media ever to film there. So if you look up Hayden Flour Mill, it's awesome. I recently found out that my university unfortunately privated the video, but before it had gone semi-viral. It was like a little bit over 100,000 views. So I was very happy about that little like 20-minute short film, even though it's definitely not my best work. Yeah, Radical Larry. Sorry,
Okay.
someone said, "Oh my
Uh,
God, Larry" in the chat. That's
yeah, yeah.
SCP-106. Yeah.
Yeah, Shadow is my SCP person if I had to pick a singular one. Um, yeah, that's really cool because SCP-106 is absolutely horrifying. But the ancient automata remind me of is SCP-2406,
Hmm.
which is the giant mech that they find with like the six Mycenaean kind of soldiers inside who all like had this kind of futuristic but also antiquated kind of technologies where they can pilot this thing. And yeah, I absolutely, because there's a type of automata we'll get to here in a bit called the Ancient, which seems like it's something that was like dug out of the sand or unburied from beneath Stonehenge or something that is now being piloted instead of being built. And those two kind of concepts kind of wrap together for me as like, oh, we're not piloting like, the Gypsy Danger from Pacific Rim. We're piloting something made of like uh, the ancient metals from Atlantis, which my brain can't remember right now, like lapis lazuli and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, it's a very interesting concept, especially because we do have a player in the game that you and I are in that is playing the ancient and seems to have uncovered these like ancient hieroglyphics on it and things like that. Um, I want to dive into to all of the types of mechs and then the pilots as well. But we are hitting just about the hour point, so this is probably a good time to take a break. So thank you all for joining us so far. We will be back in probably just about 10 minutes. Hang out, grab a cup of tea yourself or coffee or whatever beverage you choose to have on this fine Saturday intertime zone here. We'll be back shortly. Stick around. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Sword and Tea, a chat show by Sword and Key, where we talk with anyone and everyone in and around the gaming community with TTRPGs. We are joined today by Nick, gaming creator for Gehenna Gaming and creator of Eldritch Automata. Again, thank you for joining us, Nick.
Love
We're
being
gonna.
here.
I love having you. We're gonna jump back into stuff. While we were away, I was trying to remember a specific monster. Myself being a big fan of monsters, and there was one when you were talking about how horrors are kind of like composed of accumulated bodies. It really reminded me of the monster. I'm hoping we pronounce this right. The Gashadokoro from Japanese mythology. Are you familiar with that at all?
Let me look that up.
Yeah, it's Gashadokuro. It's essentially like a 30-foot skeleton that is
Yeah,
comprised of the skulls. Yeah,
I was thinking this is what you were talking about because I was like, oh, when I immediately like a monster reminds me, I was like, is this gonna be the giant skeleton?
yeah.
Ye-
Great monster. It's basically comprised of the skulls of warriors who fell on a battlefield that all just turn into all the skulls compose one then giant skeleton. It's like 30 to 50 feet tall, which just roams around the countryside looking for people to eat while chattering gachi gachi, which I guess is the sound in, like, because every culture has its thing for, like, this is what a dog says. We say bark bark. Others will, other ones say, like, woof woof or whatever. But I guess the sound of teeth clattering in Japan is gachi gachi.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, it's so horrible, but it definitely reminded me of that because it also says that it can be like really sneaky when it wants to sneak up on people, and it's just a
Mhm.
30-foot skeleton composed of human skulls like sneaking along behind somebody. Anyway, if you do ever want to add that and put a little asterisk with credit to me in Eldritch Automata, I wouldn't be mad about it. Um, but we were talking about mechs when we left. So the mechs that we have, the actual automata archetypes, are very interesting for this game. You have a whole selection of them, which I mean, evidently draw from a variety of inspirations and in media, even. We want to talk about some of the inspirations behind some of these, maybe like interesting points on like the creation of certain of them. Maybe you have a favorite, but we can go through these here.
Are you doing automata archetypes or are you doing the pilot
Yes,
ones?
yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Automata archetypes. So we're looking at like heavy beast overload. Are there any that have any that kind of like came to you quickly? Any that took maybe a little bit longer to for that inspiration to come? Are there any that have
Hmm.
like a one-to-one, like, oh, this is from one episode of Gundam that I watched? Like, yeah. What's some of the inspiration for some of the automata
So
archetypes?
the first one we ever designed was the heavy, funny enough. Um, which is why in the draft there none of them are in alphabetical order because I kind of made them as I was thinking, with the exception of one. One of them is placed strategically. That's the last one. But the heavy was the first one we invented because I knew I wanted there needed to be an automata that and this came about simply because I was like, all right, automata are going to deploy with two weapons. And I was like, well, what if there was an automata archetype that deployed with three? And that's where the idea for that the heavy came from, and just making this, wall of an automata of a mech, this thing that was big, it was slow, it was powerful, it was like a walking tank. Um, so that's where I wanted to do it. So like the heavy, was the one that, you pick that if you want to have the big artillery or like the anti-air or like the huge melee weapon. Um, and that was the first one we started out with. My ones that are like one to one taken out of like other media. So the Beast is very much inspired by Ava Unit O2 from Evangelion, which was Asuka's unit, because that was the unit that could berserk and had a beast mode to it. Like it would and its beast mode was essentially like it hunched on all fours and got very animalistic. So
Right.
that's what I meant about like making something called the Beast. I know a few people have asked, "Oh, is it like Beast Wars like Transformers?" And I go, "Well, you could take whatever inspiration you want and you could use these concepts to make whatever type of mech you want."
Sure.
But the Beast was more inspired by Ava Unit 01. And that's why it has like the alternate mode. It's got the claws on it, and it's also why the berserk behind it is that it can extend its arms out, and like because that was something that unit did. It would the arms got very long, and it would shoot out and grab like the enemies and stuff like that. Um, the overload is my it's inspired by a lot of things, but Gypsy Danger was the big one because the whole idea of like something being
Yeah.
nuclear powered. So I like the idea of the whole concept, like and Danger Zone is actually a mechanic that I lifted from League of Legends. There's a
Okay.
character in League of
Nice.
Legends named Rumble,
Sure. Yeah.
who pilots a mech, and they're like a little like mech, and their whole idea is that as they don't have like mana or anything, but as you use their abilities they overheat, and to the point where if you go past 50% heat, your abilities do more damage But if you get to 100%, you overheat and bad stuff starts to happen. So actually, like I took that mechanic and I was like, that sounds really good for a TTRPG, which is why every one of the overloads mechanics, if you're at heat 3 to 5, which it's only 1 to 5 is the range, you do
Hmm.
more effects and you do more damage, causing you to want to keep yourself at that high heat. But the minute you hit 5, you start going into meltdown and hurting yourself.
Gotcha.
And if you break your automata, like you hit 0 and go broken during meltdown, you
Oh, I
know.
love that. Yeah. I had a friend who I don't think he ever actually wrote it, but he had a great concept for, alternate history, the US colonialism, all that,
Mhm.
imposing their will, but with mechs. And he was really between the concept of like, powering them by like diesel and getting stuck in the middle of like a South American jungle in your mech and you're out of fuel. Or he's like, or what if they were, based on atomic power, and then if something goes wrong, you just decimate the entire rainforest with one mech going critical mass. So that is really cool, and especially as we're going to talk about with the concept of tragic heroes, the mechs themselves
Mhm.
being just as dangerous as any enemy. That's a very cool concept to it.
And the only other two I would say that kind of have like they're based on like very easy ideas. Like I knew I wanted the collateral right away, even though it's later on in the list. Just
Hmm.
kind of because I was like, oh, that'll be an easy one to do. Because one of the big things that we talk about in the book, and also something I always write in like the lore Bible and the notes is that, and it's a fun thing to tell my pilots, and especially in our campaign playtest that we recently wrapped up. Um, your as an automata pilot, your goal is not to save people. Your goal is to kill the horrors and kill a
Hmm.
seraph if you come across it. Because the when an automata fights, there's going to be so much collateral damage. Like if you fight in a city, that city will be leveled by the time if the fighting goes on long enough. If there are people in the area, they are going to die, and some of them is going to be because of your weapons and where you step. I mean, like 80 meters tall, 80 meters tall. You step on somewhere, you break through half a block. Like you don't
Yeah.
notice where you're stepping. You could step on someone easily, and then that's it. They're just paste. So the collateral is very much about leaning into that and all its moves. I mean, you have stuff like Scorched Earth, where you literally like rain down missiles, um, and scorch the ground, setting it ablaze. Um, you have Bring Down the House, which is about targeting a structure specifically and bringing like a skyscraper down on a horror, which
Hmm.
is like one of my favorite like moves, talents in the whole game. Um, Bill me, something like Surprise, Surprise, which it was made because in our very first playtest, someone wanted to do something like that, and I thought that was great. They hid behind a skyscraper, or like a large building, waited for the enemy to get close, and then they say, "Well, this building's not going to stop me. I'm just going to grab them through the building and like surprise attack them." And so
That's
that's where
amazing.
that came from. Like the horror like passes by like a huge building, and then this giant robot just erupts from it,
That's
which
so
I think
cool.
happened in a Godzilla. I think it happened in Godzilla 2014. Funny enough.
I was gonna say that scene sounds somewhat familiar, but I couldn't tell you where I could place that. Um, yeah, and then as you were mentioning the very last one, operations admin is actually one of my favorite concepts in this
Hmm.
game. Is that you don't have to actually be on the battlefield
Nope.
to play in Eldritch Automata.
It's a pure support class. You do have one talent that lets you get an attack, but specifically, it cannot damage anything that has an ego field, which
Right.
means you either have to rely on your team to bring down the ego field to 0 before you can start opening up on it, or you do all the great like support stuff, which is I think we need more support classes in TTRPGs, and we need stuff that like you can support and do stuff every turn. And I will say the operation admins for some games it almost feels like it's necessary, because
Hmm.
it really helps you clench those roles. It's like I always relate it to like the bard class like from D&D where like you don't realize how much the bard is doing for you until the first session that the person playing the bard misses, and you're like, man,
Right.
I was one off, I was two off. I'm all these near misses could have been critical hits if I had my support here with me.
Absolutely. Bards, artificers, clerics out there doing the real work. Yeah, I obviously I think if I was going to play, I would be really tempted towards the operations admin because
It's great.
e every time I think of it, it's a woman with a Wisconsin accent just sitting in like a cubicle somewhere. Like, oh, you need an aerial strike? Okay, well, that's gonna take 5 minutes, and just going from
You
like call to call.
you're the guy in the chair. Like that's that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, handling everything else, just like it just connects to somebody who has way too many other things to do, but also needs to call in your airstrike, and it'll happen. Just hang on. I do really like the beast too. I do like the concept of there would be people who wouldn't make anthropomorphic types of mechs. Like I'm a huge fan of Zoids. Still looking to find it somewhere streaming where I'm not going to get 1,000 viruses on my computer.
Oh yeah.
Anyone has any suggestions? But as a big fan of Zoids, had a lot of cool concepts like the Liger Zero could have like different armor sets put on it, and
Oh
but
yeah, for
everything
sure.
yeah, everything was animalistic, and there would absolutely be people out there who are like, "Oh, I don't want to fight these horrors as like a person because people have been losing so far. I would like an elephant with rockets for tusks." So yeah, I think that's great. And then the heavy, the first time I thought of that, it was Cherno Alpha from Pacific Rim
Hmm.
as the heavy. Just yeah, just absolutely just loaded for bear. So a lot of really cool concepts for the mechs. Um, and then the poor people piloting them. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit so far. What the mechs themselves, obviously being very dangerous, they are hazardous to pilot. They go into the worst case scenario for any person. But there's like an emotional, there's a mental drawback, perhaps even a physical drawback to piloting them as well. We want to touch on that a little bit, and then we'll start talking somewhat about the pilot archetypes.
Yeah, so in the book they talk about how the pilots, sometimes called riders is another slang term we have for
Mhm.
them. Because the creature, the robots are semi-sentient. They do have personalities. They might not
Right.
talk, but they do have wills. They are like symbioticas and they have like wills of their own. Um, so the riders slash pilots, you have to have a certain mindset to properly pilot an automata. And I think this is where it kind of gets a really interesting where, it you usually the people that have gone through the most that um have past traumas, have past like experiences are a little bit, trying to say this in a way that's not like ableist is always the biggest thing, but like they're more experienced. They've seen more shit.
Yeah. I
They've
mean,
been
well,
through
they
more
are
shit.
fighting a war. They are
Yeah.
experiencing trauma. They are being shaped by that. One thing I always say to my TTRPG players, especially for long-term campaigns, is that your character in session one should not recognize themselves by session 200, and vice versa. Any adventurer is going to be shaped physically and emotionally, inside and out, by their adventure to the point where they look in a mirror and it's not going to be, if they were to look back in time, that would be a completely different person in either direction, almost unrecognizable. And because they are experiencing combat and war and loss and tragedy and all these other things that just they shape us as people.
Hmm.
So absolutely the pilots who are going to be more experienced are going to be more grizzled and broken in a way, in the way the world has been broken.
Yeah, and your brain kind of has to be hardwired a certain way because you need to be the more susceptible you are to that, the more in tune with your kind of ego synthesis between you and your automata is going to be. And I mean, the archetypes, they're not something you need to be outworldly, like, towards everyone needs to be very, like, you don't have to play it on your, um, you don't have to keep your cards super close to the vest. It doesn't need to be super apparent. I mean, I'm playing a Thanatos in our game now, and a Thanatos is a very, very volatile class, but you might not understand it by just seeing Cassidy, which is my character, just by talking to them what their whole deal is. Um, but yeah, and it's funny because the way that it all kind of works, like the system, like in lore, is that the pilot interfaces with the automata in something known as the ego chamber. Um, and the ego chamber is kind of where the ego of the pilot, their sense of self, um, interfaces with the consciousness or ego of the automata, and that is kind of in a warring state with each other. That's where the slowly killing you happens. Because in order to pilot the automata and kind of tap into its more like impressive, almost supernatural abilities, you have to spend your pilot's ego. And ego is something that we track in the game, it's an actual
Right.
stat. And as your ego goes down, what that means in the narrative is that you are slowly, your character's losing that sense of self of what makes them them. And you would get to this point where you don't know where your carrier pilot ends and the automata begins. And reaching zero and why you berserk is because you lose that identity. You are not yourself anymore. You are just the automata. You are on that, you know, complete synthesis synchronization, which means you're very powerful, but you're
Hmm.
also uncontrolled. You don't have control anymore. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
where the
the ultimate
berserker comes
cost.
in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because absolutely. I mean, that was something I had wanted to do with the game that we're running is have one session where nobody's in their mechs and you kind of feel that vulnerability of being on the ground and not having all this power that you put all this work into creating your mech and now it's not available to you, and then you find a situation where you do feel so small and you have the opportunity to use your mechs, but absolutely, like you were saying, there's that cost to the pilots every single time. Um, yeah, we'll get into mechanics here as well as you were mentioning the ego field and how that's a trackable stat. But I do want to touch on pilot archetypes because you were
Hmm.
talking about the Thanatos, which the thing I love about again flavor text on any of these is it can be interpreted 100 different ways or more. The way that you're playing Cassidy with the Thanatos is just like a gun ho, kind of like ready for anything, jean vest wearing, badass. But you kind of, if you look, one step past that veneer, you do see a person who has no real concept or respect for his own mortality. And that is a really interesting way of playing that. I could also see somebody playing it like a Norse berserker, and that's what it reminds me
Hmm.
of with the denim vest is that's not armor. That's a quick way to die. And then you had that's his bear skin that he's wearing as he is running into danger, head first. So it is something that could be played very grimdark or edgy or whatever, uh, or you could play it a different way because having that concept doesn't need to be in the forefront. If anything, it probably would be a little hidden
Hmm.
because nobody wants to put a guy who's sullenly, sharpening a knife every 10 seconds into a mech, unless they're just trying to get rid of him at that point. So yeah, you have some really cool concepts here. Again, with any of these, were there any one-to-ones, any particular inspirations, or any of these that you really want to shout out for features that you were really big on?
Yeah, so there definitely is quite a bit of one for ones. The Thanatos is written about Ray, and it's pretty on the nose because Evangelion, every character has like a kind of psychological concept that they're based off of.
Right.
Shinji's whole thing is so Shinji, the main character's whole thing is Hedgehog's Dilemma. The Hedgehog's Dilemma is a playable pilot archetype, which is
Mm-hmm.
very much if you want to have what, Shinji's kind of problem was. If you want to be the Shinji, you can. Now that doesn't mean you have to be exactly one to one to what Shinji Ikari was. But if your whole thing is that you push people away because you're afraid of hurting others and them hurting yourself, so you figure if I don't have those connections, I can't be hurt, you should play the Hedgehog's Dilemma. Um, and Ray and Evangelion's whole thing was here was the person that just they want, on a primal level, they had no regards for their own life, and they kind of felt like death was the only option for them, and so they had this death drive, and that's something that the Thanatos is all about. Whether it comes from guilt, like shame, or even just a lack of consideration, like your character does not have any regard for their life, and they almost get the thrill out of putting that in danger, and that, in doing so, they can put others in danger. And I'm sure we'll see that with Cassidy next session when we are actually in the automatas. The inferior superior is Asuka from Evangelion, because yet again here is, and it's kind of like a trope that also gets played out a lot too. It's not just in Evangelion, obviously. But the inferior superior is like, here's someone that is very cocky on the surface, And is very much a perfectionist on the surface, but on inside, they're doing this because low self-esteem, they still feel inferior. And
Right.
whenever they do tend to fail, they take it upon the hardest. One of my favorite talents for the inferior spirit is cracks in the armor, which is whenever you fail your roll in any skill, you can voluntarily lower your stability by one in order to gain an automatic success on your next roll. So you're internalizing that failure and you're using it, and it's hurting your mental state in the long run, but you're going to use that as a crutch to kind of get that next success, to make sure the next time I do it, it's going to be great. Or even something like applause, which is all about validation from people around you, which kind of fuels you. Um, and then you have something like the manufactured, which is I really wanted to put androids in the game, and they were written in the lore, and so, but also the awesome concept of, oh, you always hear, whether they're called replicants, synthetics, androids, whatever, is, what is my humanity versus like my coding, and that's where the manufacturer's whole thing is, where they kind of struggle between maintaining their integrity, um, downward to until it becomes their empathy, which really is what makes them human. The
Hmm.
sheltered is about playing someone that doesn't know war, that is that pure kind of slate of snow. This doesn't mean that they're like, you know, super innocent, but it also means that they've never experienced war. And there's always, I feel like in every mech show, there's always one that's like the very like gung ho, like I've never piloted before. And then
Hmm.
when they see that real stuff happen, that real shit that they get dropped into, that's when the cracks start to kind of form. Um, Hyper responsible is great. I love all the archetypes. Hyper responsible is great because that's like the person that kind of self internalizes that they're like the protagonist. They're the only ones that can get this done, and they say, well, if I put all the blame on myself, if I am the shield and sword for everyone, if I'll save everyone and it's going to be me. But it's like, okay, so what happens when, you know, you internalize that, you don't share that pain with others, it's going to, boil up inside and hurt you. Stuff like the Bound, which is very much kind of a allegory for like, you know, having PTSD with traumatic events that kind of still affect you. The Empty, which is very much an allegory for depression. Um, the Other, which is what if you have, you've connected so much with your automata that you might have this other voice inside of you. But the Other is really interesting because you don't have to play it as that voice being an automata, you know, that you can straight just play that as like a form of plurality or whatnot. I think that's really interesting because I have seen it done both ways. Um, the hatred, the control freak, the legacy, a lot of great stuff in here, and I really, while the automata archetypes are the more like fun stuff, I really hope that people attach the automata archetypes are the more like overtly action stuff. I really hope that the people attach the pilot archetypes, because I feel like those were the building blocks where I showed like the first love and care for this system.
Absolutely. And it shows. And they do have such cool concepts to them. And to your point where, kind of making sure that this isn't an ableist sort of concept, I would say that you've done incredibly well with this, and it really is imperative to
Thank
the
you.
player then. Yeah, absolutely, because you're not limiting anyone by the the diagnosis that might be attributed or alluded to by any of these, somebody who works in mental health. Anybody with any mental disorder, whether diagnosed or not, is still very capable of doing anything, even piloting a mech. And yes, we all have something that might be there to hold us back, but it also shapes us as people. And these are, yeah, archetypes that often you find from people who have experienced war. And in a world where we do experience so much war, we're going to see more and more of these kinds of diagnoses in the real world. Are those people going to be incapable of living lives afterwards? Absolutely not. But they are going to be shaped by them, and especially as people in the world of Eldritch Automata who are continuing to live through a global war against nigh unkillable enemies that is going to shape people. And that's, I think, why The Sheltered is maybe one of my favorites, because my brain immediately goes to like Brendan Fraser, and I think the movie Blast from the Past, where he's just living in like the ideal bunker with oh, I can't remember the actor's name.
Yeah, with his
It's,
parents though, it's like
yeah,
yeah,
his parents down there, yeah. And
underground Pasadena or something.
yeah, and then he just comes and he's just like, this idealized kind of 50s-esque child in what is, the grungy late 90s. And but to have somebody come out and be like, well everybody, let's get to slapping some faces or whatever. That's a really interesting concept, because everybody else is so deeply scarred and shaped by the world around them. Um, let's talk a little bit about gameplay and the mechanics you built into this, because it is so incredibly sleek that I have to shout this out. It's so easy to jump right into. So what are the dice that we use for Eldritch Automata?
We used pools of D6s, which is
Pools of D6.
something inherent of Year Zero. Year Zero is an incredibly sleek and narratively focused game, but
Hmm.
also has a lot of like mechanics. So it has that perfect ability of like easy, very low floor to enter to play with, high ceiling to master and do a lot of cool stuff in.
Absolutely. So I believe the rules, it does say up to 15 d6s. So gather those up. You'll definitely need them. I don't think you'll need 15 consistently.
Oh no.
Um, that's if stuff goes either I think it's incredibly bad. I don't think there's an incredibly good
And
side of
yeah,
15.
and that's more a recommendation to have that on
Right.
hand. I mean, you could definitely have more dice than that because the stress level goes to 10, which are each, that those are
Right.
dice. And then I think at a given time the ceiling of max attributes, which would be really hard to hit, you could technically get a 10 byte base dice roll. So you could have up to 20 dice if you really wanted to. It'd be extremely
Okay.
difficult though.
Yeah. I'm sure there's somebody out there who now really wants to try that.
Yeah, they want to do
Uh,
the exalted approach. I appreciate them, whoever's
yeah,
out there.
yeah. So as far as stats go, four main stats: strength, agility, wits, and empathy. Really streamlined those. I love that. And then there are substats to them as well. I think the strength, agility, wits, empathy, I think those are, boilerplate. They say what they mean. Empathy, I think, is a really interesting one though, because this is one of the games where connecting to another person is so important to gameplay and survival, that it's an interesting note. It's not intelligence, it's not wisdom. Those are kind of combined a little bit into wits, what you
Hmm.
know, how you react to the world around you, but how you connect to those around you is often something that's not really seen in TTRPGs, especially one that is action mech heavy. And so it was very cool to see. Um, Substats, what looks like health, durability, stability, ego field, stress. Um, any of those that you wanted to touch on? Those often aren't ones that we see, especially ego and ego field being, I think, very unique to
Hmm.
Eldritch Automata. Anything you wanted to address with any of those?
Yeah, so ego, I kind of explained. Ego is your sense of stealth, which is a trackable stat that you have. Ego is spent in order to empower your automata to make those abilities. Ego field is something that your maximum ego field is equal to your maximum ego. Um, but they're not something where like ego goes down by one, ego field also goes down by one. They are two separate stats. Ego field is this concept as when you're in your automata can materialize its own ego as a nigh impenetrable field. And that's kind of the idea. The horrors can do it, the seraphs can do it. And that's what makes that idea of putting like a scratch to them with conventional weaponry very hard to do, because their ego fields just make them like invulnerable to that. So the only thing, and the thing that the automatas do in lore is that they weaponize their ego fields as well. So like all their attacks, even though it's not like baked into the mechanics, all their attacks inherently use a little bit of their ego in order to try to pierce those ego fields. And the ways that mechanically that ego fields have is that's like your um So if I do 5 damage to you and you have an ego field of 3, your ego field's gonna soak that 3, and you're only gonna take 2 damage.
Right.
Now, every time your ego field is surpassed by a roll, you have to roll what's called the degradation roll, ego degradation roll. And what that is you take your current rating of your ego field and you roll that many in d6s, and for
Hmm.
however many ones show up on the die, you decrease by that much. And
Boy.
so when you're at, you know, throw spitballing numbers, you're at 8 ego field. The minute something goes past it, you're probably going to lose one or two right off the bat. But when you're down to like your last ego field, it's going to be, or last two, it's going to be a lot harder to roll a one because the chances on that are so low. That being said, if you're at ego field 0, anything normal weaponry will affect you. So, and that's same goes for the seraphs and the horrors. So that was the whole thing we talked about, like the operations admin not being hurt ego fields. Well, the
Hmm.
minute you bring someone's ego field down to 0, now the military can just swarm in and just start and
Absolutely,
take them
pelted with
out.
conventional weaponry.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like, you might have a mech that does fire a Gatling gun, but every single bullet's gonna have like a little ego shield around it just to penetrate them a little bit
exactly.
more. Yeah. And then there is a drawback to the ego pool that you have, I guess the ego tank, which is going berserk.
So
So
Berserk, yeah. Berserk is like
like
a double-edged sword because I love the idea of failing forward and I love the idea of playing to lose. I think that's such an interesting concept to me. Um, but not playing to lose where it's like a complete loss, playing to lose where, losing, can be a powerful weapon in its own. Um, So Berserk can be hit two ways. Either your ego goes down to 0, or when your durability, which is your health pool for your automata, reaches 0, normally your automata will be broken, you roll a critical injury. But you can instead uh, look to me and say, hey, I'm going to take, I'll take the critical injury, but I'm going to go berserk. And what that does is that refills your durability completely, and now
mhm.
you're in your berserk state. And berserks are awesome because they are almost like these narrative little text boxes that you read out loud whenever you do. And the whole idea is that you have to act towards the prompt on your berserk, but they always end up giving you more powerful effects. Like, we talked about the beast. The beast gets the extended arms when they berserk. The
Mhm.
overload, they get set permanently to heat 5 and start completely melting down. So they get all that powerful, effects to them. But now, I'm gonna blow up soon if I don't end this in time. So berserking is like a last resort type of weaponry when you want to bring the enemy down and you do not care about the alloys of those around you. Because
Right.
a lot of the time in berserk, you don't really differentiate friend from foe. If you would ask me what my favorite berserk is, it's the prototypes berserk, which is you're a lot stronger, but every time you kill an enemy, you have to spend a slow action to eat that enemy. So your automata starts cannibalizing not only
Ugh,
eating the corpses of like horrors, but like it even says if your allies' automatas fall, you eat them too.
you eat them too. Yeah, that's absolutely horrible. I didn't read that far into the prototype, and
I
that's
think
that's
someone,
pretty
yeah.
wonderful. That's pretty wonderful. Yeah, that's pretty good. Um, no, wow, that's I'm gonna have to play that sometime. Okay, okay. So yeah, again, I love the streamlining of the stats, the substats. I think makes a lot of sense too, because like I said, you have health, you have the durability, you have stability, but then yeah, definitely the emotional side of it, the ethereal almost side of it. Maybe that's not the best word, but yeah, the ego field, the stress aspect of it as well being something that comes into it, and thereby empathy being an important thing as well. Um, every pilot and automata gets talents. So that's something that are specific to them as well. You mentioned, a couple before. Um, you get certain skills based on the level that your pilot is at. You get starting values. You can kind of divvy them up, or is it that pilots get specific ones? Try
So
to
you
so
pick you
yes,
pick
yeah,
two
yes,
talents from your automata, and then you pick two talents from your pilot archetype.
right. And then your pilot archetype also gives you your um Are those two options, or can you kind of divvy up your numbers, what have you? I'm seeing a hyper responsible
Uh,
has strength 2, strength 3 options.
oh, you're talking about the arrays. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I'm no,
No,
I'm sorry,
so
I'm not using the right terminology.
no, you're fine. So the cool thing about how we do character creation is that each you pick one archetype and then you pick the other and you combine those to make your full stat array, your
Hmm.
full like stats. So each book has two stat arrays that you can pick from. So
Gotcha.
we always refer them to like A and B, like oh, hyper responsible A plus the collateral B, or so it kind of means, I always say that it's 100, it's 12 by 12, so over 144 combinations, but because there are four different, it's, there's technically like three to four different permutations you can do each of those 144 combinations. It's really like 576 unique combinations for
Hmm.
archetypes. But yeah, it's good because it allows you to kind of pick your stat array, so you're not locked in. So you're like, oh, I want to play a melee focused automata. Well, this automata archetype I really want to play gives me a bunch of range combat, and now I have to pick a specific pilot archetype that gives me melee combat, or I'm not going to be able to gameplay wise do what I want to do. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to give you options. So by giving everyone two stat arrays, you can kind of mix and match and kind of get the ideal stat spread that you want, while also not sacrificing your wand of abilities. Now, there are certain things like the sheltered is always going to have, and any other stat arrays, high empathy, because that's their
Right.
thing. The sheltered's not like war torn that way. They're able to connect very closely with people, so they're always going to have that high, empathy. Um, but yeah, it's kind of in like an interesting way. So like, I've seen and I've done play tests where everyone plays different characters and everyone plays the same two archetypes, and they've all managed to make like really unique characters, and still feel different from one another, which I think was great.
Yeah, that is really cool because you would think that there would be, cultures out there that would have, across the board, these are the types of mechs that we use, and maybe similar pilots. Again, if you're going to have, referencing Fallout, an entire vault where everybody is sheltered, essentially, everybody uses the same types of mechs. You still need a way to differentiate yourself, but that's still something that is so very possible given the options that are within this game. Um, one of my favorite qualities are the more amorphous ones, the ones that you can't really attribute stats to. And you do have some really good ones in this. Ambition and regret are really great. That your character has something that they're striving for. They have their ambition. There are you kind of given recommendations for certain pilots, but you can kind of make it whatever you want. You gain XP if you are moving either significantly forward or sometimes even significantly back. It's kind of up to the GM's
Yeah.
discretion for XP. Yeah.
Um, what I really like about XP, and this is something that I'll fully admit, this is something that's in the base year zero engine that I've kind of adapted. Um, but giving out XP, it basically says at the end of the session, you essentially like read these five questions out, and for everyone that you answer yes to, you give them an XP, and it's kind of like this little survey. And so doing so, I usually get at least three. But there are some sessions where we've done five, and it's been real emotional. And it's great because it's not just focused around like mechanics; it's also focused around a lot of like role play and narrative stuff. So one of those questions for two of those, like you just mentioned, one of them is, did you strive towards your ambition in a big way? And then the other one is did your regret hinder you in any way?
Right.
So yeah, and if your regret hindered you, that's an XP, and if you strive towards your ambition, that's an XP.
Yeah. Or like make a big sacrifice or something as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. Yeah. Technically, every time you have a big combat, you should get an XP
Yeah,
as
did
well.
you
Yeah.
sacrifice? Did you overcome an outstanding obstacle? Did you make significant waylays into and discovering the truth or something like that?
Right.
I'm not sure exactly what the language is right off the top of my head, but it's stuff like that that's very like goal oriented.
But I love that because it pushes the players to want to move forward in a world that is scary, in a world where character death is real, where it is tragic hero kind of stuff. You're probably not going to make it to the end. It pushes them to not have cold feet about things and want to increase more and more. It's fortune favors the bold. Just sometimes the bold also get their heads knocked off by a towering horror made of human corpses. So It's a really cool concept to want to sacrifice, to want to struggle towards things, to engage in combat, even no win kind of combats. Somebody might have in the back of their head, well, it's just one more XP till I get this next thing. So I love those kinds of incentives towards gameplay. We also have relationships, which I think is definitely interesting in a game again where relationship threads are so very fragile. But yeah, it definitely incentivizes characters to connect to one another. What was the big push behind this?
I've always loved relationship mechanics in games. I think giving tying mechanics to roleplay is very important because some, and I'll talk about some camps of players. Some of the, you have players that will naturally roleplay. That's what they like about TTRPGs. They're gonna do that. Um, and then you have players that are really there for the mechanics, and that's okay. It's okay to go to the game and be like, "Hey, I'm playing a game. I want to indulge in the mechanics." Um, and I don't really am not too much of a role player. So in that case, we wanted to kind of incentivize them to at least try the role play out. And kind of because it is a narratively like, it is a narrative game at the end of the day with all the action and combat. I mean, there's still a lot of like narration and story. So we wanted to tie some mechanics that would allow players that are more mechanically inclined to feel like, you know, if you do have a session that's all role play, you don't feel like, and I don't want to use the phrase waste your time because I don't think you're ever wasting your time if you're having fun
Right,
and building that story. But there are some people that do equivalent, well, if I don't get XP out of it, if I don't get like a bonus out of it, it kind of was a waste of time that or time I could have been better well spent. And so strands, which is our like relationship mechanic, is the way to kind of answer that, where it rewards you for having scenes with your NPCs, and then you're also your fellow players as well. And then for the people that are more role play inclined, it gives them mechanical rewards for indulging, for going in that behavior. So it works both ways, which is what I really like about it. And what I also think it's cool about it is that it encourages. So strands are like a track of your relationship, and you can have multiple strands with the same person. Um, and the nice thing about strands is once you use them, you like exhaust them, they don't go away. And the way to refresh them and bring that, ability to use those strands again back is that you have to go back and you have to spend a significant amount of time with them. It's a shift, which shift is like usually anywhere between 5 and 7 hours. So
right,
essentially, what that does is it gives you a lot of downtime actions as well. So you're not just saying, hey, there's a week between combat encounters. What do you do? You're not just saying, like, oh well we skipped through that because like I guess I just do this and that's it. Well, now every day you gotta be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go visit this person and hang out with them. Like we don't have to have now you have to have a significant like almost like very intimate moment to build a strand, but in
hmm
order to refresh those strands could be something simple. You could, our characters can have three strands of each other, and I could say, hey, my character asks your character, let's go to the amusement park and hang out and be friends. Not that there's an amusement park. Maybe there's like a shitty
Maybe there's
amusement
an
park.
amusement
So
park. Yeah, why not?
yeah.
That's
Or maybe we go to the shooting range, or maybe we just have a few drinks at the bar and we play cards together, and at the end it's like, okay, well that gave me my strands back, so now when we're fighting again, here are 3 times I can use those bonuses and maybe help myself out. And what it does is it consistently allows you to build relationships with people. So
yeah,
now, because they're not limited, it's okay if I keep hanging out with this one NPC, so this one NPC that I have 5 strands with, it's like, wow, as a mechanical player, I have been incentivized to have an NPC attached to, and now I have a best friend in the game where normally I wouldn't have gave a shit about that. And then as a role player, that's more inclined for that. You're like, wow, my relationships are actually being cemented, and I can actually track them, and I know who I'm technically closer to in a level. And the beautiful things about strands is that they're not just for your friends, they're not just for your romantic like encounters. They are also for like your rivals and your enemies. In our latest campaign playtest, um, all the players had strands with the main enemy, the main antagonist, human antagonist, and it was great because it was like, okay, they have this connection to each other because they have constantly clashed with each other multiple times and they're so
right.
inclined. And you can, break strands and use them, but it would also, at the end of the day, it kind of made it more memorable. So I know I just
Absolutely.
ranted there for a second. I
No,
apologize,
that's
but I
that's
just
so
love
cool.
strands.
I love it. I love the whole concept of it because yeah, absolutely to your point. helps people to want to role play. You get those really cool scenes, and then much in the scenario that you just mentioned, or in the scenario where you have one character who's, they're on their last like dangling thread, and you're just about to lose that character, or you have lost that character. The that bond that you've built makes so much, it has so much more weight to it. And in a horror game where loss is prevalent, that is such a great um narrative to really work with. Whether you have those bonds to the villain, whether you have a bond to a friend who's about to die, or a bond that you, or a friend that you've been separated from, and then you have those moments of, actually role playing out the downtime, because we all love mechs, we all think giant robots are cool, but if you look at any type of mech media property, it's not the entire time of a show, of a movie. It's actually very little time that they are in the giant robot. A lot of it is them as pilots talking, chatting. A Power Rangers episode only has them in the fucking giant robot for the last like 5 minutes, maybe, of a 30-minute
Yeah,
episode. Yeah, people kind of like, we get so enamored with the giant robots, we forget it's a human story that makes
exactly.
the fight interesting. And that's what's so beautiful about this, is, yeah, the human element is so important. You aren't just a giant robot, you're the person inside of it, and that person is very, very fragile and has a lot of
Exactly.
needs.
And
It does a little bit feel like playing The Sims, a little bit, if Sims was a giant robot game.
oh yeah, definitely for sure. And I think, and I know we're getting close to time, and I
No,
apologize
you're
for
fine, you're
pushing us
fine. We
past it.
All the time we need, we're good.
But I do want to give a specific example that I think is so beautiful about Strands. We had a character once whose the character's brother had died before the adventure started. And we decided we were going to give that player three strands to represent their connection to the brother. And they spent two of them throughout that game, and they held on to that last one until the very final fight, and they finally spent it because they felt like they had accomplished their mission, and they finally were able to kind of they were able to kind of find closure with their brother's death. And
So
spending that
good.
last strain was like symbolic of that.
That's
Um,
so good. Fuck, that's good. I love those narratives.
yeah, and I think it kind of ties into like, and I think I can kind of get into this because we are towards the end, like the final
We,
like theme and
Nick, I got time if you got time.
okay.
We still got to talk
I
about weapons. Yeah, we're not
Oh yeah,
rushing
go talk
anything.
about
You're
what.
fine.
There
Yeah,
is one question I do want to end on. Oh, the one thing I
yeah.
do want to end on because I think it encompasses it. But yeah, let's talk about weapons though.
Yeah, I'm not letting you go before we talk about some of these badass fucking weapons that you threw into this thing. Because you have combat, obviously, major part of it. Combat is very well detailed in this. You have some really cool concepts for like the type of battlefield you're fighting on, and whether it has certain qualities to it, the actions that you can take. Let's go ahead and just talk about combat in general, and then we'll go into the weapons that are used during combat.
hmm
So, what does combat look like for Eldritch Automata?
So the combat flow is that you declare your attack.
Hmm.
You create your dice pool. So say I'm shooting with a rifle, I take my range attack, I take my agility, which is tied to that. I make a dice pool and I roll it. Now in year zero in Eldritch Automata, you only need one success. But the only time you get a success on a die is if it shows a six. Anything else is considered is not a success, considered a failure. So sometimes when you can roll a pool of d6s and get like no successes, and
Right.
you only get one, but that one success is all that you need to do your base thing, and then the additional successes that you have can be spent on what's called stunts. And attacks, one of the stunts is always it lets you have good damage, like it lets you have extra damage, I should say, like
Hmm.
an extra, it's like a 1-to-1 ratio. And then you take that total damage and you compare that to the enemy's ego field. We talked about that, where you reduce the enemy's ego field. The enemy's ego field reduces by that much. Anything left over is dealt as actual damage. You would roll that degradation roll, or the enemy would roll the degradation roll, and that's how you kind of resolve an attack. Um, so at first it seems like maybe it's a little bit a lot, but like as we get going, it's very simple just to be like, all right, attack, calculate, degradation roll, resolve, boom, we're good to go.
Hmm.
And then combat is kind of like traded back. Obviously, there's a lot of map zone controls. Um, there's a cover system. You can find cover in the game, and that kind of gives you extra. It kind of functioning is gives you extra points in your ego fields because it's like, okay, now I'm hiding behind a wall that gives me 2 cover, and I have a 4 ego field of 4. So now they have to score over 6 damage in order to get, because it's like if you roll, they roll 7 damage. Well, the first 2 points of that damage are taken off by the cover.
Right.
The remainder is taken off by the ego field. You have 1 left over. Boom. So you took what would have been a 3 damage and turned it into a measly 1, which means you can continue fighting. And your health pool is usually only like between 6 to 10.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot. It's not a lot. So 3 damage like doesn't sound like a lot, but it could be like a third of your health or a half of your health if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and the way that kind of deals into weapons is something that I thought was um, so like with automatas, you don't really customize like your parts as per as like you don't talk about, oh, I have this frame with these arms, with these legs, with this type of head. But I know customization is something that people love and I love as well. So I built a kind of robust weapon designing system that's about building your weapons. So in the game, when you create a character, it actually tells you to create your weapons. There's a whole list of pre-made weapons you can use um, that are kind of made using the same roles if you don't want to have to go through the hassle. But you do have full weapon creation on it, which is great. And the idea with that is it's you pick a damage tag, you pick a range tag, and you pick a descriptor tag. So your damage tag is what level of damage you do. They're static numbers. And they each have a cost as they go up and up and up. And cost is how we enforce balance on your weapons. Every tag has a cost. Range decides your range. You're either that close, you're medium, you're long. Which and there's
Right.
a few little like special tags you can put on for that. And then you have your descriptor, which is really going to shape the extra effects that your tag has or your weapon has and what it can do. So a signature weapon is made on a 3 cost. Just to give you an example, and it's gonna get a little technical in here, but it's fine. I
Okay.
swear it's fairly easy once you kind of have it explained.
It really is.
So say I want to make a signature weapon, which every automata gets a signature weapon. So signature weapon is just defined as a 3 cost weapon. I go, okay, I want it to have medium damage. That's 1. I want it to be, I want it to have medium range. Okay, that's 1. I have 1 for descriptor tags. So I'm looking and I go, man, I would really love it if I'm gonna give it, maybe I'm building a shotgun. I'm gonna give it knockback. And knockback is a 1 tag. And what that does is it lets me like whenever I can spend a stunt to knock someone back a zone away. But then I'm
Right.
like, I really wish um I could make it so it does damage over time, but damage over time is 2, is an extra 2 cost, and I'm already at 3. So how do I do that? So that's where these things called flaw tags come into mind. So flaw tags are ways to kind of um it hurts the weapon in some way, but what it does is it refunds points. So I take ammo and I take the second level of ammo, which gives me a -2 cost. So that brings me down to 1. But that also means my weapon could run out of ammunition and be useless. But now I'm able to put that damage over time on here. So now while my shotgun has low ammo, it now knocks back. It does damage over time. Maybe like the bolts are like, hollow points or something like that, or like some sort of like shrapnel digging that'll hurt the horrors. So now I've completely made an original weapon that I've just designed in my head. Or here, we could do, if you don't mind doing a quick experiment, give me a weapon, any weapon, and I can design it within like probably 2 minutes.
Yeah. Let's just do double barrel shotgun.
Double barrel shotgun. All right. So sawed off or not sawed off?
I'll say not sawed off. Let's
So
go classic with
all
this.
right, cool. So I'm gonna say it's gonna do medium range. Because
Sure.
that sounds like, so that we're at 1. I'm gonna say, okay, I'm gonna add on 2 for area, because the really nice thing about shotguns is you have like the little bit of spread
Sure.
on them. So I'm gonna give them area, which is a 2, which is gonna bring me up to my 3. I'm, it's just, a regular double-barreled shotgun. If it's like the traditional ones, you're only putting 2 in at a time, so it's gonna have low ammunition. So I'm gonna
Right.
put ammo. I'm actually gonna put ammo 2 on there, which is gonna refund 2 of my points. So now I'm down to 1, and I have 2 more. And then I'm gonna look at it and I'm gonna put knockback on it, which is gonna give it one again. So I
Mhm.
have one more, and then I'm going to put. Ooh, I'm I'm actually going to put piercing on there, and piercing's like a scaling one, so I'm only gonna put piercing one. So that means now I have this double-barreled automata shotgun that is for my giant robot that has low ammunition, can shoot an entire area. When I shoot it, it's going to knock people back, and it's going to pierce their ego fields. It's going to ignore one of their point of their ego fields.
Damn. Okay.
Uh, sorry for putting you on the spot there, but
No, no, not at all. Not at all. That's very cool that you can build anything within your imagination, anything in real world. That's yeah, that's amazing. And yet you do have you it seems like you kind of thought of everything in this. You do have, sections on explosions, falling, drowning, fire. Again, the types of fields that you could fight in as well, whether it be like a scorched kind of area that you have to
Mhm.
get out of, or an electrified field, or I'm trying to remember the name of the one that was the kind of like spooky one. Where
Oh,
is
oh my God. Let me open it up really quick. Sorry, I'm in the I know
no,
exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, because
I think
that's
it's just called
there we
Eldritch,
are.
isn't it? Or no?
Maps and zones, the Beyond. The
Yes.
zone is infused with an unsettling atmosphere such as intense cold, ghostly whispers, or supernatural phenomena. Characters must roll their current stress while entering the zone for the first time. Panicking results in losing a point of stability. And that's just so cool because, yeah, you have all the real world stuff: cluttered, dark, cramped, scorched, flooded, electrified. And it's like, oh, yeah, but also we're still fighting supernatural things. And you might just come across a fucking ghost field. And yeah, especially as I'm from the Eastern time zone, technically the Midwest. Ohio is a weird state, but my brain does go to how would this affect places like Gettysburg, where you have the souls of everyone coming up, or places like DC, or yeah, places like West Virginia, the people that are still so entrenched there in the Appalachians. Yeah, that's so cool to have the Beyond as part of that. But yeah, you do have disease on here as well, because you
Hmm.
can get infected wounds or uh, phantom agony as well, which I had not read this one before, but yeah, it is an Eldritch element. Okay, I do want to check on that, and then shell syndrome as well. Is
Yeah,
that
my
is
favorite.
yeah, is that the a tie into shell shock? Is that a PTSD thing, or is that something
No,
else?
so shell syndrome is if you because you're in, your ego's intrinsically linked to the automata,
Right.
your automata gets, broken or destroyed while you connected to it, it causes this almost psychic backlash that will have some long-lasting effects. So I don't want to call it specifically like PTSD or like shell shocked or anything, because
Yeah,
like
you're right. It's something else entirely.
yeah, it's something else entirely. It's almost like, your mind is plugged into this machine. The machine blew up while your mind was plugged into it. Like, you're going to have some residual effects after. And something that isn't here yet, that's being written by Josh Tamansky, who worked on Liminal Horror and specifically The Bureau, which is an awesome liminal horror scenario,
Hmm.
is writing our the diseases for these two special ones called horror toxicosis and seraph radiation. And what those are
Fantastic.
is that when humans out of the automata come into contact with horrors, they actually begin like their bodies begin to break down. And eventually, if you're not careful, you're a human could become in horror through horror toxicosis. And Seraphs is the same kind of the same way, except the end result of that is that you become like a thrall for the Seraph. Like your mind's just
Hmm.
gone, you're taken over. Um, you don't experience that when you're in an automata because the automata's ego fields protect you from that. But if you're a pilot and you bail out of your automata, now that's a very real thing you can deal with, which makes trying to fight horrors a lot harder um,
Hmm.
on as humans. So it's a very different game. One of the kind of planned supplements we do have for our kind of roadmap beyond is making an entire book that is based around explore or adventure that's based around not using your automatas, just being a straight up like squad type horror game.
Yeah, it's like how quick do you want your death to be? Um, Amazing. That's yeah. Again, so ripe for inspiration, so incredibly dark, so metal as hell. Um, I do also like the critical injury table, which can always be rolled on as well. I always appreciate a good critical injury table, or also like letting players kind of describe their own critical injuries if that is something that they want to do. I always like giving them the opportunity to uh, take their own, just give them themselves a critical injury. Um, Always appreciate a game with a coup de grace concept to it. Let's go into weapons because you have a lot of really cool weapons. A lot
Mhm.
of them being very contemporary, and then a lot of them being just stuff that would be in the apocalypse. So going through, I mean, just there's so many, and like you said, you can kind of customize your own as well. Are there any that are like particular favorites of yours? Again, any that have like inspirations that you want to know?
So, out of the sidearms specifically, I do want to talk about one I know you love, which is the truck gauntlet,
I do love the
which
Chuck Gauntlet. Yeah,
which is funny
it's a
enough.
good name.
I don't know if you've seen the new trailer for Godzilla X Kong, the new Empire.
I
Uh
have, yeah.
Yo, Kong definitely has a truck gauntlet. That's what
He
I
does,
imagine
yeah.
when I see a truck
Yeah.
gauntlet. It's just this gauntlet that you put on your automata and it has like force built into it, like an actual like kind of like kinetic force driver. And then when you punch someone, it just unleashes it and knocks them back. Um and we call it a truck gauntlet because it's like getting hit by a truck.
I love that that is the name because people are like, oh, that's like getting hit by a truck. That's a truck. Don't give it a fancy name. It's a truck gauntlet.
Truck
That's
gauntlet.
why it's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Kinetic Glove was very much inspired by the stasis module from Dead Space, which is I slap this thing on. I imagine it like it's almost like a skeleton that goes over your hand, very exposed. You can lift
Mm-hmm.
people up. You can only you can use it boom, as a shield to block, but you can
Right.
also lift people up and like throw them and stuff like that. Um, Ricochet pistol. This is my wanted expression, the curving the bullet,
Right.
you
Right.
aim behind cover, boom, bullets ricochet. Very just so not obviously it's still like a science fiction game at the end of the day, horror game at the end of the day. So you have that like more fantastical elements to it. The
Sure.
thermal short sword. We have a lot of thermal weapons. You know, the
Very cool.
laser
Yeah.
sword. That's how we explain lasers in the game. Cryo blaster, stuff like that. I love the concept of hard light, which is why like hard light daggers a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then something simple like a service pistol.
Yeah. Some great names on some of these though. The Skinner blade
Yep.
does what it says. But personal favorite name aside from the truck gauntlet is the harmonic shiv, which is just elegant in its naming structure. That's very good.
Oh yeah, and
Love anytime you
harmonizing
can
is
pick a
such a cool
shiv.
tag. This is like one of my favorite tags in the game because I think it's something that really hasn't been seen in a lot of like weaponry systems before, which is the whole idea of a harmonizing is that as it's made to keep attacking the same enemy, so you get
Mm-hmm.
bonuses every time you attack the enemy, the enemy you attacked previously, and so it keeps scaling and scaling and scaling. So it's great for bosses because you're gonna be hitting the same person. Um, but it's also amazing because it's like, okay, I attacked you once, now I get that bonus. I attack you again, now we have another bonus, and I keep building and building, and
Right.
eventually I'm gonna get so bonused up, I'm just gonna one shot you.
Very good.
And then
Um,
its signature arms. Oh, I'm sorry, I
mhm.
didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please. That's exactly where I was going. Go ahead.
In signature arms, I mean, I love the slag shotgun. Um, the idea of having this superheated like slag of metal. I mean, we kind of talked
Mm-hmm.
about that. The ego slaying rifle is very much like a kind of a long range, almost like a sniper rifle, made to just pierce through ego. Railgun. I think this was like one of the first things I made because I was like, oh, a mech's gotta have. There needs to be a railgun. I love railguns. I think railguns are cool.
They really
I
are.
Yeah, I know they're not really used in real life yet, but we're getting there. They're operational. It's not fiction. Um, love the idea of railguns. Love the idea of scythes and like just the ego scythe is cool. Incinerator. I know I needed a flamethrower. So those are just a
Of
few. And
course, yeah.
then
For dealing with giant horrors, absolutely, you need a flamethrower.
so yeah, a lot of this is where like I kind of got to shed more the serious side, just kind of go full like ridiculous with some of them. And then of course, big boy bomb. You want a nuke? We
Big
got a
boy
nuke.
bomb. Yeah. I do really love that a lot of these are melee weapons. Not all of them, but you do have, a spear, you have a scythe, you have the lance. It's still ranged melee weapons, but melee
Hmm.
weapons and the thermal sword. In addition to, I always love a mech that has like a medieval kind of vibe to it, like the ego bow. A mech drawing back a bow with like the strands of the bow are actually like electrified energy or something
Yeah.
like that. It's a great image. So yeah, absolutely inspired signature arms. And then you have some really cool gear as well, because you're not just outfitting your mech, you're outfitting your pilot as well, because like I said, they're not necessarily going to be in the mech the whole time. So
Yeah.
you do have some cool armor as well.
So the idea is that whenever you make your automata, you can take a signature arm and a sidearm, or you can take a signature arm and a piece of equipment. And same for pilots. Pilots only deploy with a sidearm or one piece of equipment. So you decide that, uh, which is really awesome. Which actually it was cool because I was gonna originally kind of deploy with just one of the equipment in our game, and then I was like, well, if we're all fighting on foot, I should have a weapon probably. Um, but it's really
Yeah.
cool because pilots can have armor, and that's something specific to pilots because it's like, what do you mean? Why would you give your automata already has armor? It's the metal, like it's what they're built out. They're all
It's what they
armor.
are.
But like you can give your pilot like mesh vest, a ghillie suit, um, reinforced clothing. My favorite is the integrated combat suit, which is made for like piloting,
Mm,
up until like a full-on like astronaut gear, the Prometheus hazard suit. And
hmm.
then in terms of like equipment that you can have, I love the decoy launcher for the automata. I think that's such a cool idea that
Very
you
good.
can just, yeah, decoys in order to like impose stuff on the rolls. Um, the emergency ejection system is great on an automata because it's just a one-time use that you can just, all right, especially with the overload. The overload's, I'm about to blow up. All right, I'm getting out of here.
Hmm.
Save myself. And then there's stuff that you don't think you'll need. Like I love how all the helmets, if you look at any helmet, it always says at the end negates personal critical injury, 64, which if you look at the critical injury box and kind of go down all the way to what 64 is, which I am doing right now.
Hmm.
Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Oh, here we go. Critical injury. Sorry, this stuff I don't know off the top of my head.
No, you're fine.
Is a crushed skull, which is if you roll a crushed skull injury, your character dies.
Right.
But if you have a helmet, no, it doesn't. That does not happen. Your
Very
helmet's
nice.
destroyed, but you're safe. And then like some cool stuff like smoke dispensers, noise makers, gravitational pulse set. There's just a lot of cool stuff. Like I said, I had a lot of fun making those.
It shows, and a lot of these actually address an oversight that I made earlier, which is that there are not just two types of enemies in Eldritch Automata. You don't just have horrors and stress. You also have other people, and you
Oh
have other
yeah,
mechs. Yeah, that's something that I didn't necessarily touch on before, but yeah, it's the end of the world. People are just as awful as anything else. They're just as
yeah.
awful as they are now, if not worse. So yeah, you might have to fight other mechs. You might have to fight, like we were talking about, other factions or cults or other types of religions. People aren't all going to kumbaya and come together at the end of the world. If anything, they are going to become more isolated and ingrained in their own beliefs and practices and concept for their own personal survival, which is going to only further endanger things going out there. So I think that's why there are things like the EMP charge and the one you mentioned before, the decoy launcher. Because yeah, flares, it specifically says enemy targeting systems. And a horror might not have what you would specifically call targeting systems. So you could absolutely distract them, but you could also distract another mech that's trying to
A
come after you.
heat-seeking missile. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, there's so many options. I am the kind of person where I prefer more options as opposed to only a few, and because you can really, really customize and make the specific character piloting the specific mech that you want. And you could play this game 1,000 times and probably play a different character every single time based on not only your choices in the what is given here, but also the choices that you make as the player. And that's an incredible game because it's a game that has repeatability to it, which is sometimes hard with game creation. You know, sometimes people find their favorites. Sometimes people just the other options don't appeal to them. I feel like you could make so many different characters, so many different archetypes, and even create some for yourself. So this is absolutely a fantastic game. Um, I don't necessarily have any other questions that I've written down for you. We've kind of touched a lot on your inspirations for stuff. We've talked about gameplay. We've looked at what people can play. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Anything that I might have missed, or anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, two things. One, I just want to say thank you. This has
Of
probably been
course.
the most comprehensive interview about my system. There have been a lot of great interviews out there that have been done, and like we've touched on certain stuff that I like to talk about, but this is the first one that we've done that we've covered pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. So thank you for allowing me to do a deep dive on my system, and I hope that someone watching this, maybe they know a little bit more about Eldritch Automata and like feel more comfortable playing. Um, and the second thing, the last point I wanted to make, and we kind of touched on it when we were talking about pilot archetypes, and I think it's very important, is this is not Eldritch Automata isn't just a cosmic horror game. And it's very easy to kind of get lost when we talk about like the horrors and seraphics and like the horrors of war. But at the end of the day, it's a game about hope because humanity has been pushed to the brink of extinction. And for that, there's a lot of levity in your situation. Something that we don't mention at all, but it's something that I think to talk about is that a lot of infighting, like there is a lot of like nation, like being kind of against each other. Like civilizations can get to fight each other, organizations can fight each other, but people don't generally fight each other anymore. Like when faced with an otherworldly being that wants to destroy you, these kind of social constructs that we have to deal with now, these kind of whether it's like racism or sexism, um they don't fucking matter because we're all seen as food to these creatures or things or people to be controlled by these creatures. So we need to unite. This is a story about humanity, and it doesn't matter what race you are, what sexuality you are, what gender you are, or like who you are as a you are we are all human, and that is the thing that is binding us together. um and it is about how does humanity rebuild. We've been pushed to the brink of the edge, but now we have the ability to start over. Will we do this better this time? Are we deserving of salvation and freedom and victory? And I like to think so, yes. And maybe your campaign is showing that you're not, and there are definitely human enemies out there that do think that we as humanity don't deserve that second chance. But um, that's why they're kind of seen as the enemy, and that's why they're groups that you can either be antagonistic with or not be, and that's up to you. But the game is also about rebuilding. It's about what you do with that hope. The automatas are horrifying weapons that are list such a cost, but they also are a symbol of hope. They're a symbol of a better tomorrow and what you'll do in order to find that better tomorrow. And I think when you have horror, if you don't have horror without hope, I don't think you have very good horror. I think the best horror out there is when you have that idea that, hey, maybe there's a chance it's going to be okay after this. And I think that's the point I just want everyone to remember about EA.
That's incredibly said. Yes, absolutely. It is a beautiful game about hope, about restoring. And I think the game represents a point in the world, the fictional world, where humanity stops retreating and starts fighting back. That's what the mech represent. Yes, there will always be sacrifice, but I think that's a wonderful concept to work with. It is a tragic hero game, but tragic heroes do represent hope. The tragedy of them is that they must sacrifice to move forward. Forward movement is ultimately the goal. So very well said, Nick. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for this wonderful interview, for sharing Eldritch Automata with us, and for allowing us to feature it on the channel as well. Can't wait to see where this goes in the future. We will be there cheering you along the entire way. Um, where can we find more about Eldritch Automata right now?
So if you go to gehennagaming.com/Eldritch Automata, you can sign up for our mailing list. We are looking to relaunch the campaign probably in May. A little bit of a lower a campaign. Last time we ran the campaign, we aimed for 65,000. We only ended up making about 37, a little past 37,000, which is still amazing, by the way. It's still tremendous. And I think we've really brainstormed how to bring our costs down. We're going to have to axe some of the more superfluous things that we wanted to attach to it, but that's stuff that we can make up and kind of deal in time with. And it also is that are things that don't adjust the main core rulebook as it is. The core rulebook is going to stay as it is. The game system itself will not be touched. Just some of the extras, might not be available right from the start. And I do want to tell everyone that this is a game system. It is a system. It is a game line. It's not going to stop with one book. We're going to keep pushing forward. I want to keep doing regular releases. And as long as people want more Eldritch Automata, then hopefully 20 years from now, I'll still be making Eldritch Automata. Because that's kind of my dream. So yeah, please sign up for the mailing list. Please back the Kickstarter when it can. If you ever want to talk about that game, hit me up on social media. I'm at Nolan Nick. I'm also on Gehenna Gaming. That's our Twitter there. I'm always available in our Discord that you can join and kind of hang out and talk with. I always love to talk. Our quick start is coming very soon. We're just doing editing and layout. That free quick start's going to release. You're going to be able to play the game, and you're going to have a little scenario, the Dark Passenger, with it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And big thank you to Derek and Eva for having me on. Y'all are amazing, and I can't wait to finish our game next week. And if you ever want to chat or play games again, even in the future, even if it's not EA, I support y'all, and I would play with y'all again for sure.
Guaranteed. Absolutely. Yes. Like Nick said, thank you to Eva for running tech for this. Well, you can't see her. She has been here the whole time. Again, thank you to Nick. Please go follow him at Noble Nick on all social medias. Follow Gehenna Gaming, Gehenna Gaming, on all social medias as well. Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, both of them are on all of that. Thank you for joining us for this session of Sword and Tea. This is where we're going to wrap up. So, again, go check out Eldritch Automata wherever you can. It's a fantastic game. Still working on a few of the things, as Nick mentioned, but the final product is sure to be absolutely fantastic. If this is what the rough draft looks like, I can't wait to see the final one. Check us out next Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time for the second half of our game feature of Eldritch Automata. We actually have a fantastic cast with that, including Rack, who is playing, let's see if I can remember what all my players are actually playing as. I know he has the Junker, and his pilot type is the Empty. We have Kit, who is playing the Other, because Kit likes to play where their characters have some Eldritch voice in their head, and are also playing the Ancient. Anna, fantastically, is playing both the manufactured and the operations admin as an AI named Wombat. And then Nick as well, who, like he mentioned, is going to be playing rather the Thanatos, and is it the Heavy? Is that
the Collateral?
The Collateral, that's what it was. Okay. I almost got 4 out of 4. But yes, definitely check us out. It's a fantastic game. They're getting in their mechs as of this next episode. They're going to be fighting pretty nasty corrosive monsters. So I'm excited for that. For more Sword and Key stuff, you can follow all of our socials. You can find everything pretty much at beacons.ai/Sword and Key. You can join our Discord there. You can see all of our ongoing charity campaigns through our Tiltifies. We are raising money for a number of great charities right now, including the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is just an ongoing Tiltify campaign that we are running. You can donate to that at any time. It has incentives going for some future games. And then you can also see all of our socials there. Most of our socials are sword_and_key. Again, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can also see us later today at 3 p.m. Pacific time for the return of Horizon's Call. I will be GMing that. That is our ongoing nautical campaign going on 3 or 4, how many years now? But one of my players has decided to have a meeting with a Rakshasa, so what could go wrong? I am also the co-host of the podcast Monster Crush. If you want to find that, you can find that wherever podcasts are found. My friend LD and I sit down and talk about different cryptids, creatures, and miscellaneous monsters, and how smoochable they are. So if you enjoy monsters, if you enjoy horrible things, check that out wherever podcasts are found. Again, you can find all of that beacons.ai/sword and key. If you want to follow me, again, my name is Derek Sword. I use he, him pronouns. Sword is my real last name. Yes, it's awesome. No, you can't have it. If you want to, you can find me at dsword16 on most social medias. Most of the stuff I do is for Sword and Key, so go check them out first and foremost. We will have more stuff out in the near future. Looking at our calendar, let's see. Like I said, Horizon's Call is later today. We have the premiere of Trophy Dark starting tomorrow, the 3rd, at 10 a.m. Pacific time. That will run for 4 weeks. On Fridays, every other Friday, so the next one being the 8th, we actually have movie nights over in our Discord, which again, you can join the Beacons. The next movie night is going to be the Super Mario Brothers movie, the 2023 one. I tried to find the 80s one, but it's not streaming anywhere, so that's why physical media is important. Like I said, we will have part 2 of Eldritch Automata next Saturday at 10 a.m. Horizon's Call will be back as well. The next episode of Monster Crush will release on the 10th, fingers crossed. And then we're looking to have a bit of a surprise on Tuesday the 12th. We're going to see if we can play Baldur's Gate on Sword and Key and stream it. We're playing around with that right now, so nothing is set, but I will try to have more details to you all on that as soon as possible. On the 16th, it's a very special day. It is mod of Sword and Key Mare, as well as resident GM and player Alex. It is both of their birthdays. We will also be back with another Sword and Tea with Kristen Randall, author of the No Girlfriend Rule, more Horizon's Call, Trophy Dark again playing every Saturday. And then we will have another Sword and Tea coming up with NL Morrison and the TTRPG Print Weaver on the 21st. That is a Thursday at 4 p.m. More stuff to come. We have actually, it looks like a busy month, and like I said, more applications to come out soon as well, as we're looking to do more games. So check out our Discord first, check out our social media second, and we will keep everything up to date for you. Let me make sure that there we go. We are going to be rating Valdrianth, and so go spread some positivity over there, and then we'll be back here at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So I'll see you all in a couple of hours. Again, thank you to Gehenna Gaming. Thank you to Nick. Go check out Eldritch Automata, and until we see you again, be kind to yourselves, take care of yourselves and others. We'll be back